approve the agenda. Does anyone have any recommended changes or corrections they'd like to add?
Chair, I do not. That said, we did neglect to move the aviation systems plan objectives update from last month, where we bumped it to this month. Our plan, since we kind of just put this together this morning, is to have that during the end of next month. If people would prefer to see a longer update today, they can. We can do that. We can amend it in as an information item. Otherwise, you can always watch the information item on the planning committee where it actually happened. I see Cole has his hand up, and it's probably to talk about the same thing.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Cole.
Something different, actually. The agenda has a wrong item. So there was no transit planning technical work group last month, but there was a bike ped. So we're supposed to report out on the bike ped, and that's supposed to alternate every month. And I'm trying to see if we have someone that was at that meeting that can give an update. But just noting that it won't be a transit planning technical working group update. It might be a bike ped.
Okay. Thanks, Cole. Good catch. All right. Just taking note of that. Joe, I think in regards to your question there about adding that informational item, since it's the 4th of July week, I know people are probably trying to get stuff done, get out of the office. Let's just push that to the following. Otherwise, they can watch it, like you said, on the other meeting. So they can watch the recording of that. But we'll try and keep this meeting short.
Internally, Chair, that's what we thought people would say. So we will, if anybody does care to be directed to where there's a longer version of that, I can certainly share that with them.
Wonderful.
In fact, I'll put that in the chat once I've stopped calling the roll.
Okay. Let's see. So since we're going to make a minor amendment there to underneath the committee reports and business, instead of a TAC transit planning update, it'll be the TAC bike and ped planning work group update. Pretty small change, but nonetheless, why don't we go through a roll call to approve that change to the agenda today? Go ahead, Joe.
Chair, we probably need technically a motion and second on
that. You're right. Yes.
So
do we have a moment? Wonderful.
Lucher.
Motion
Thanks,
to move.
Thank you. All right, we have a first and a second.
Who was the second?
Kathleen Mail.
Well, that helps with my attendance. It's the right. Thank you. Anoka County, MacPherson.
Aye.
Harvard County, Robgent.
Aye.
Dakota County, Labrie.
Here.
Hennepin County, Jason Piper is here, I believe.
Yep. Aye.
Ramsey County, Isaacson.
Aye.
Scott County, Jensen.
Aye.
Washington County, Sarah Allen, I believe.
Yes, aye.
7W, Houseman. Or anybody. Egan Mathis.
Aye.
Eden Perry Ellis.
Schulze in for Ellis.
I was told that. My apologies.
Yep.
Bradley Kozlucher.
Aye.
Chen Hassan Howley.
Aye.
Brooklyn Park Culver. Woodbury Hartzell.
Aye.
Lakeville Omi.
Aye.
Plymouth Thompson. Minneapolis Engineering Hager.
Aye.
Minneapolis Planning Mail.
Aye.
St. Paul Engineering Nick Peterson.
Aye.
St. Paul Planning Collins.
Aye.
Metro Transit on.
Adam Harrington in for Jonathan. Aye.
Suburban Transit fighting.
Aye.
Bicycle Sabota.
Aye.
Pedestrian Turner Bargain.
Aye.
Deed Eddie. Mac Reef, I believe, said she'd be late. Council Community Development Boylan.
Aye.
MnDOT Freight Meyer. MnDOT Metro McCartney.
She's not gonna be here today.
MPCA AO. Or Dickerson. MTS Planning Hinniker, I believe, is here for Steve.
Yep. Aye.
And Tab Kotsukos.
Aye.
Chair, not only does the vote pass, but my concerns over a quorum were completely unfounded.
All right. Let's see. Yeah, we had a lot of people show up today, so that's good. Thank you. So the revised agenda has been approved. The next item here is approval of the June 4th, 2025 Technical Advisory Committee minutes. Does anyone have any comments or would like to make a motion to approve?
I'll make
So
a
moved,
motion.
Chair.
Okay, I saw Chris was the motion and the second was Jenny. Is that right?
Sounds good.
Okay, thank you. With that, any other further conversation? Otherwise, Joel, I'll turn it over to you for a roll call vote.
MacPherson.
Aye.
Robjan.
Aye.
Labrie.
Aye.
Piper.
Aye.
Isaacson.
Aye.
Jensen.
Aye.
Allen.
Aye.
Mathis.
Aye.
Schultz.
Aye.
I apologize if I mispronounced that. Is it Schultz or Schulte?
Schulze.
Schulte. Thank you. Sorry about that. Kozlucher.
Aye.
Howley.
Aye.
Hartzell.
Aye.
Omi.
Aye.
Hager.
Aye.
Mayle.
Aye.
Nick Peterson.
Aye.
Collins.
Aye.
Harrington.
Aye.
Fighton.
Aye.
Sabota.
Aye.
Turner Bargain.
Aye.
Reef. Yep. Boylan.
I was not here, so abstain.
Hinniker.
Aye.
Kotsukos.
Aye.
And if I missed anybody that's since joined, let me know. Otherwise, the ayes have it. Either way.
All right, thank you, Joe. All right, the minutes have been approved. Next item on the agenda is public comment. Do we have any members from the public that have joined us this morning that would like to make a comment?
Chair, none have come forward.
Okay. All right, I'll ask one more time. I don't see any members of the public here, but anyone want to make a comment? Okay. One thing, I think this is probably a good point to talk a little bit about this. On the minutes, you guys will notice that, and I'll pull those up quick. At the top of the minutes, there is the Dakota Land, Water, and People acknowledgement. So speaking with Joe a little bit about this, thank you, Joe, for pulling that up. So the council has been reading this, I believe, at every one of their meetings. And it's something that they want to include in there just to acknowledge the land that we exist upon here in the metro area and in Minnesota, and just acknowledging the past that's happened here. So with that, I wanted to bring it up and mention it here. I don't think it's something that we're going to read every meeting, but it's something we want to acknowledge on behalf of the council here and their priorities. So Joe, anything else we want to add on this, or anything from a staff level others should know about?
I don't, we're probably gonna, we're still talking internally about this, and it'll probably be read at TAB and at the technical committees when maybe once a year, about when the main the sort of big number of changes come in like January or February. It'll be on the agendas and the minutes, but it won't be read except for probably about once a year. But that's kind of still being talked about a little bit.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Any questions from the group on that? Okay, not seeing any. I just wanted to mention that. All right, not hearing any or seeing any hands raised for public comment. We'll move on. Elaine, could you provide us a TAB report?
Thank you, Chair. TAB met on June 18th. Vice Chair Gittell led the meeting. She reported that the 2025 state legislative session included changes to the Corridors of Commerce program regarding geographic balance targets for this funding source. And as a result, the item that went through TAC last month regarding the project we pulled off. It'll come back probably in August or September, depending on the results of future work. So MnDOT was in the middle of a solicitation process for $22 million in readiness grants. And based on the new legislative language, the process will need to restart to allow metro projects. And that means those touching the I-494 and 694 Beltway and inward a chance to apply. And given the percentages in the law, the metro projects area will be awarded between 25 to 27.5% of the 22 million available. And this funding can be used on planning and engineering type activities on future projects. And the TAB Executive Committee also met prior to TAB and discussed what would be happening at the federal level and reduction of staff. And there will be continued monitoring to see if this impacts the approvals that are submitted. That means the actions that come through our committees and TAB and the council to the federal government. For the MnDOT report, Connie Sejan provided an update on safety trends. To date, there were 140 fatalities statewide compared to 188 in 2024. And the metro area has 40% of the fatalities. There have been, at the TAB meeting, there were 16 pedestrian fatalities, 12 in the metro area, 10 motorcycle fatalities, 4 in the metro area, and 5 bike fatalities. And one of those was in the metro area. And then CBGM also provided a summary of legislation and projects funded. And that the metro portion of the Corridors of Commerce Readiness Advancement nomination process is now open for nominations, and information can be found on their website. For the MPCA, Frank Kolash reported that in late May, there was a Congressional Review Act resolution to revoke California's Clean Air Act waivers for advanced clean cars, advanced clean trucks, and omnibus NOx rule. No state can use the standards to reduce GHG. And there was a lot in that bill of proposed rescissions. Going forward, though, they're tracking the cuts that are being proposed in the budget proposal. And they're also continuing the Climate Action Framework update. The next round of public engagement opportunities will begin, and it would be last week, with sector-based conversations. And the Climate Smart Food Systems Grant continues to move forward, as well as the Electric School Bus Grant from EPA and the VW settlement. For the MAC report, Kyle Crimmins reported that we are in peak summer travel. There were 468 average daily departures, and passenger levels are flat compared to 2024. There is one runway down for construction, so they're receiving noise complaints from areas they usually don't hear from. And that construction should be completed around August. For the Metropolitan Council, Deb Barber reported Metro Transit launched the B line on June 14th. And the council's committee on the whole has begun having some meetings on the road and met at Chaska following the TAB meeting. For the Suburban Transit Association, Gary Hansen reported Maple Grove Transit is installing bike lockers at its transit stations to help promote active transportation. Southwest Transit's new 494 corridor service has converted microtransit service into a fixed route, doubling its ridership and reducing ride time. They have implemented their autonomous vehicle service and booked nearly 1,700 riders in May. And Minnesota Valley Transit Authority is organizing a business council to foster strategic collaboration between MBTA and regional employers. For business items, TAB approved the items that came through TAC for the Streamlined tip amendment request for 2 HSIP projects adjustments, a Streamlined tip amendment request for MnDOT's Min 280 pavement and bridge rehabilitation, and recommended the 2050 Transportation Policy Plan Amendment to include the Blue Line and Gold Line extensions. And again, the one on the Corridors of Commerce was pulled and may come back to the committees if there are submissions in the metro area that would change the action. So we would give the technical committees a chance to look back at those. If there are no new projects added, we will just add the item back to the TAB agenda. For information items, Scott Merrick of FHWA presented the TMA certification results. There was update on the regional solicitation evaluation. Glenn Johnson updated the active transportation work group information. The legislature allocated $2 million of the TAB's active transportation funding to the Washington Avenue Bridge project. And then as an update on what the projects that were funded in 2024, 4 projects have grant agreements executed and 1 project is already under construction in Jordan. 2 projects have rescinded their awards. One of those projects received other funding and was completed. The next active transportation meeting will be at the end of July. And Steve Peterson provided an update to TAB on the work of the special interest work groups, and that they've had 2 work groups and are discussing the criteria and measures. And the next policymaker work group will meet July 16th before TAB. And Joe Whiting provided information on item on aviation system plan update. And that was report from TAB.
All right, thanks, Elaine. And again, I'd just like to express my appreciation for all of you and your staff that have volunteered time to be on those special interest working groups and the regional solicitation revamp process. It's a lot of work. I know it's a lot of time commitment, but I know it's truly a worthwhile cause. So thank you for that. Any questions or comments for Elaine? Okay, not seeing any. We'll move into the committee reports and business. The first item here is the executive committee. We did not meet this morning. We didn't have a lot on the agenda to talk about, and recognizing the holiday this coming weekend, we did not hold our executive committee meeting this morning. So we'll jump right into the first Streamlined tip amendment item here. And Joel, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Couple of pretty simple tip amendments today. Is this the one? Yes. So I'll just go to the draw here. So in this case, in this one, 2025-24, MnDOT requested an amendment to add a new project to the tip to replace signs along 4.6 miles. Am I on the right one?
Yes, the signs. Yep.
Oh, yep, I'm on the right one. My bad. 4.6 miles of signs along 4.6 miles of I-494 from Argenta Trail in Eagan to Minnesota Highway 77 in Bloomington. This request is made to match the project that is currently in the draft 26 through 29 tip. And so this is reflected in the draft that's being produced in case the project is let before that tip is approved, tip/STIP are approved by the USDOT. And so it's the project is going to be funded with NHPP funds, and those are obviously not done through the regional solicitation. That I would stand for questions.
Thanks, Joel. Any questions for Joel? Otherwise, I'd entertain a motion to recommend adoption of an amendment to the 2025 TIP to add
So
the sign
moved.
replacement. All right, there we go. Thanks, Patrick.
All right.
Second.
Thanks, Jim. All right, we have a first and a second. Any further discussion? Otherwise, we'll move to roll call here. Joe, will turn it over to you again.
All right, MacPherson,
Aye.
Robjan,
Aye.
Labrie,
Aye.
Piper,
Aye.
Isaacson,
Aye.
Jensen,
Aye.
Allen,
Aye.
Hausman. Oh, he's not there. I'm sorry. Mathis,
Aye.
Schulze,
Aye.
Kozlucher,
Aye.
Howley,
Aye.
Hartzell,
Aye.
Omi,
Aye.
Hager,
Aye.
Mayo,
Aye.
Peterson,
Aye.
Collins,
Aye.
Harrington,
Aye.
Fighton,
Aye.
Sabota, Sabota,
Aye.
Turner Bargan.
Aye.
Reef, are you here yet? Boylan,
Aye.
Hineker,
Aye.
and Kotsukos. Elaine,
Aye.
Chair, 24 ayes. Nobody else.
Wonderful. Wonderful. That item's approved. All right, next we'll move on to the second item here, which is 2025-25. Go ahead, Joe.
So this is two MnDOT sponsored projects that are proposed for amendment in the TIP. The first one is a signal replacement ADA and drainage at US 169 in St. Louis Park in Minnetonka. Let's go down there. The project cost is set to increase from 1 million to 4.18 million. It's an NHPP funded project, much like the last one. And this next one, and here's the location. This next one is a drainage and signage, drainage and signal project at US 61 and Canyon Road B in Maplewood. The project cost is set to increase from 405,000 to 1,320,000. And there's also a small scope change to this one, adding ADA improvements in TMS. The proposed amendment also includes changing of funding from NHPP to ST Surface Transportation Block Grant Program. That action in and of itself would not actually warrant amendment, but given the rest of this, it's part of the action. And so both of these are being done to match projects currently in the draft 26 through 29 TIP and STIP, and therefore are being done for the same reason the previous one was being done, which is to make sure that it's accurate for a letting that could occur possibly before federal approval of the 26 and 29 STIP. And with that, I would stand for questions.
Thanks, Joe. Any questions for Joe? Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, just I want to make a comment here. Especially the first project, the signal cost triples. I know this is apparently due to MnDOT's new standard for signal poles. And so it just behoove other agencies to be aware of this. And Mr. Chair, I would say counties, often, maybe work with these signals quite a bit more than cities do in cost share. But there may be, it may be helpful for us to request that MnDOT track these costs, on their new signal design and pass those along so that we know maybe what's coming with regard to cost share on those signals going forward.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. That's a great point. I did want to bring up, I'm not sure if all of the counties and cities have received the tech memo that came from MnDOT. I want to say it was probably 2 or 3 weeks ago regarding this issue. And my understanding is that for the first few years, for the next couple of years in the TIP, I think it's through 2027 or 2028, MnDOT is going to pick up the increased cost share of these projects for any projects that are currently programmed. And then I believe it's either 28 or 29. Those projects from there on out, the normal MnDOT cost share would take effect and would be followed. So, you know, if it's you've got a 4-legged intersection, 1 leg is the counties, 1 leg is the cities, and then 2 legs are the states. The state would pick up their legs, the city would pick up their leg, and the county would pick up their leg, and so forth. So the next couple of years, we're going to get a little reprieve from that. MnDOT is recognizing the increased costs. I know Molly was unable to attend today, but if you haven't seen that tech memo and you've got a project coming forward, please reach out to your area manager or area engineer and talk to them about that, because that is being discussed behind the scenes, at least for the next couple program years. So again, it's either 28 or 29. I think it kicks in that they're not going to pick up that additional cost anymore. So great point though, Jim. Adam, you see you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I had the same question. Certainly it's a good project, but the tripling, quadrupling of the cost is significant. It'd be helpful if MnDOT could simply email that tech memo out to this group. We do a lot of work with all our roadway partners, whether it's state, county, or city. So it'd be really helpful for us to know as these projects develop. That's a big increase.
Yep. Thanks, Adam. Jason.
Thanks, Chair. Just echoing Jim and Adam's comments, and then maybe also expanding to our own programming schedules and timelines. You know, most of us have our own CIPs and budgeting processes, so kind of information sharing is critical. And then I guess alternatively, I've noticed the last couple of years, these action items have included maps. Those are super helpful as we prepare for these meetings. So shout out to Met Council staff. I know it takes time to create those maps, but they're really helpful for me to orient myself on where the heck we are in the metro. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Appreciate that. Any additional questions on this one? Otherwise, I'd entertain a motion to approve. Again, I'd entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
All right, thanks, Patrick.
Second.
Thanks, Jason. All right, we have a first and a second. Any additional discussion? Otherwise, I'll turn it over to Joe for a roll call vote.
MacPherson,
Aye.
Robgent,
Aye.
Labrie,
Aye.
Piper,
Aye.
Isaacson,
Aye.
Jensen,
Aye.
Allen,
Aye.
Mathis,
Aye.
Schulze,
Aye.
Lucher,
Aye.
Howley,
Aye.
Hartzell,
Aye.
Omi,
Aye.
Hager,
Aye.
Mayel,
Aye.
Peterson,
Aye.
Collins,
Aye.
Harrington,
Aye.
Fighton,
Aye.
Sabota,
Aye.
Turner Bargan,
Aye.
Boylan,
Aye.
Henniker,
Aye.
and Kotsukos.
Aye.
Guys have it, 24 again.
All right, thank you, Joe. All right, that item is approved. Next, we'll move on to the bicycle and pedestrian planning working group update. Do we have a
Sure.
member?
I'll go ahead and take that. Joe, and Joe.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, so the bike bed planning technical work group met in June, June 25th, sorry. They had 2 topics on the agenda. One of them was the Regional Solicitation Active Transportation Program update. And the other item was a local comprehensive plan advisory guidance. So Joe Whiting presented both of those from MTS. The solicitation presentation largely focused on 2 topics for active transportation funding. Those are the tab sales tax dollars that are going to be distributed with the next solicitation. And the topics were largely around regional balance and geographic equity. And there was a lot of support for ensuring through some sort of rules how we do that, but there were different options presented and there wasn't consensus, but there was just a lot of support for ensuring that we have some form of guaranteed regional balance with those funds. The other topic that was largely discussed was the funding maximums, and I think there was just an acknowledgement that there's a tie between regional balance and the funding maximums. So nothing new that you guys haven't heard before in terms of conceptual stuff. That topic was also discussed at the Regional Solicitation Technical Steering Committee, and that'll also be discussed there in the future. So it was just an opportunity to get some more feedback on that topic. The second item, as I said, was the comp plan advisory guidance. Joe Whiting presented a lot of the different tools that we're hoping to produce and support folks that are going to be doing their comprehensive plan updates for 2050 starting this fall when we release the system statements. Generally speaking, I think everyone is just appreciative of the update from Joe and acknowledge that it's a lot of great work and a lot of helpful work that's being produced by the council to help communities with comprehensive planning. In particular, bike and ped is an area that maybe isn't as thoroughly developed by every community. And so just giving more tools to local governments will be helpful. So that was it. The other thing I would just note is Steve Elmer did remind folks that the RBTN updates were due along with the regional bicycle barrier requests this Monday. And I think we got something around 80 RBTN change requests. And so that group will be working through those over the next couple of months as we prepare to release the 2026 regional solicitation, because that is an important step in that process. But I think they just got them on Monday, so I don't want to confirm any details there, but I know we got a lot of requests, and so we'll be working through that. And that all goes back through the Bike Ped Planning Technical Working Group for a thorough review.
Wonderful. Thanks, Cole. Any questions for Cole? Okay, not seeing any. Appreciate that update. Next, we'll move on to the planning committee. I'll turn it over to the chair, Gina.
Good morning, everyone. Excuse me. TAC planning did meet in June, on June 12th, and we had one action item and one information item. The action item you will hear from Joe Whiting today. It's another airport related item. We've had a lot of those lately. So Joe's been very helpful in walking us through all the details of aeronautics planning, which is something I don't know a lot about and maybe others. So it's been an item of interest and he'll present this action item to you today, which is the review of the Flying Cloud Airport 2040 long-term comprehensive plan. TAC planning did approve that with the staff's recommendation. And Joe, I don't know, do you want me to cover the information item and just turn it so we can just kick it over to Joe, or do you want to have Joe go through the action item and then I'll wrap up at the end? Excuse me.
That was confusing. I don't know which Joe you're talking to or
Oh,
about.
I was meant Chair Joe.
No problem. I think whatever's easiest, if you want to run through this item and then have Joe Whiting do an update on this or whatever, and then turn it over to Joe Barbeau for the roll call. That works for me.
Okay, sounds good. So yeah, like I said, TAC planning reviewed this item, listened to the presentation, had a few minor questions, but ultimately approved the action. So I can turn that over then to Joe for the presentation. And then when he's done, I can cover the information item after the roll call.
All right,
Wonderful.
thanks, chairs. Yeah, we got one too many Joes, it seems like these days, but we'll figure that out. And I actually found out me and Joe Barbeau share the same middle name as well, so that won't help anyone either.
There's never enough Joes out there.
Good morning, everybody. I am here to present the Flying Cloud 2040 long-term comprehensive plan for its consistency determination at the Met Council. I am joined by Eric Gillis and Michelle Ross from MAC, I believe. If there's any additional questions after the presentation, we can call them up and help us answer any questions that we have. First, we'll be kind of going through the planning basics. Joe Barbeau, could you mute yourself, please? Okay. First, go to some planning basics of aviation, and then we will move on into the plan details before wrapping up on some considerations and going to the motion. So yeah, so I always like to do this before these start off and just kind of remind everybody what our role is here in aviation, because this is not something that's federally mandated. It's actually state statute would task the council to plan for the regional aviation system and also our regional airports to produce what are called long-term comprehensive plans in state statute. Additionally to that, then Met Council is then also required to review and approve and to make that consistency determination. Any of these airport comprehensive plans for MAC airports or any community comprehensive plans with expanded aviation elements at the municipal airports in South St. Paul and Forest Lake. As always, this process allows the Met Council staff to review the draft plan during the public comment period and provide technical comments for advisory comments for the MAC to consider as they finalize the document. A little bit about long-term comprehensive plans. So these are required under the aviation planning process, as I mentioned. These are generally 20-year planning documents, so they cover a 20-year planning horizon for the airports. These are regularly updated as scheduled in the TPP. The previous Flying Cloud Airport Long-Term Comprehensive Plan was completed in 2010. The update is a little delayed this time due to additional FAA review. We'll kind of talk a little bit about that in a second. These plans are really used to identify needed projects, define operational parameters, moving out those 20-year planning horizon, and assess any environmental and financial requirements for the concept plans as presented in the plan. These plans must be consistent with Thrive MSP 2040. And why we still talk about Thrive today. So Flying Cloud 2040 long-term plan was developed under Thrive. So again, started in 2021. So future long-term comprehensive plans that come through here, we will be then reviewing it against Imagine 2050. But because this plan was created under Thrive, we will still be reviewing it for consistency under Thrive. These plans are also a basic input to the update of the aviation system plan, which thankfully you won't hear me drone on all morning, so you won't have to hear about that again today. But that we have worked on incorporating the findings in the 2040 long-term comprehensive plan of Flying Cloud into the 2050 aviation system plan update, which will be coming for public comment release next month. A little overview on the planning process done for the Flying Cloud long-term plan update. So as I mentioned, there was some delays in the actual finalization or completion of the draft due to additional needed FAA review time of certain elements of the preferred alternative, mostly on the airfield side. So that delayed the planning process quite a bit. So that's why you see these forecasts that were developed all the way back in 2021. They would have probably been, we would have been here sooner, and those forecasts wouldn't have been as far back as they are today. But because of that FAA review, we're just getting it to it now in 25. The plan outlines projected airport activity, operations, and conceptual planned investments to meet the demand both at the airport today and then looking in the future. They also consider high-level environmental impacts. There was a pretty robust public engagement process conducted throughout this process. There was a stakeholder advisory panel established with both local and regional stakeholders, council staff included. There also was a Flying Cloud Airport Advisory Committee feedback. So that's a body that meets at the Eden Prairie City Hall with City Council. And so that was something that provided throughout that process well. In addition, there's public surveys and events, and also the public comment period that came at the end before this consistency review process. Just some quick existing airport conditions. So Flying Cloud Airport is located in Eden Prairie, just north of the Minnesota River, north of Shakopee there. It is classified as a national reliever at the federal level, a key general aviation airport at the state level, and it is a minor airport in the regional system. Its airport role is not primary commercial service. It is a general aviation airport. Its primary use is not commercial air service. It is a general aviation airport with some additional jet traffic. Those are incorrect role and use, so apologies for that. The size of the airport is about 540 acres. Based aircraft in 2021 were 333, with annual operations used as the baseline for the projection at 133,000 in 2021. It has multiple runways that range from 2,690 feet to that's maximum 5,000 feet per state law. It has an instrument landing system and has an air traffic control tower, which is a part-time tower on the airfield. So when the MAC kicks off these planning processes. They like to establish specific goals for the planning process to meet to ensure that the airport is meeting MAC goals for their whole regional system. The goals for Flying Cloud in the 2040 planning process were to enhance airport safety, were to preserve and, if possible, improve the operational capabilities of the current family of aircraft used in the airport. So again, designing for those existing aircraft used in the airport, and to promote a financial sustainability of the MAC reliever airport system by exploring revenue opportunities for aeronautical and non-aeronautical development. So we'll see some of that development in the actual concept plans in a minute here. A big part of these long-term plans I mentioned is the activity forecast that go through the planning horizon. So it's the 2040 plan, so this goes out to 2040. These really dictate with those existing aircraft, using the aircraft as dictate what the future facility needs are for the airport, as well as we understand how much aircraft we expect to be using the airport. The 2040 forecasts show operations at 143,000, or about a 7% growth through the planning period. We're expecting to see about 354 aircraft based at the airport, or about a 6% growth through the planning period. Some forecast details here. So piston aircraft, so those are your, smaller aircraft with propellers in the front. We'll expect to see some activity growth for those, but not a major source of growth going through the future for the airport. However, Flying Cloud Airport is projected to see the highest share of business and general aviation jet activity in the region by the end of the planning period by 2040, with about 45% of all regional jet operations by 2040 occurring at Flying Cloud Airport. As you can see here on this chart on the bottom here, this is also expected to lead to a large need for jet storage at the airport, as well as that jet use grows at the airport. So you can see that jet storage increasing quite a bit by 2040. Some of the factors shaping these forecasts, it's an interesting trend seeing here, a lot of business jet activity kind of growing at Flying Cloud. There's really three big things that are really dictating that future growth of jet traffic. And the first one is location. So there is a increasing regional share of business jet traffic here at Flying Cloud, and that's really because of where it is. So Flying Cloud again is located in Prairie, in the southwest suburbs, where we do have a large concentration of corporate headquarters, large business activity, and also corporate executive housing nearby. So generally, if you're going to be working, flying private at a corporate level, you're going to want to fly closest to where you live or work, and you're not necessarily going to be flying to St. Paul or Blaine and then driving down to southwest suburbs. You'd rather fly straight into Flying Cloud, which is right there. So we really see that demand for business jets highest in the southwest suburbs, and we do see that being a big factor in why we're seeing that jet traffic growth at Flying Cloud. Another big factor of the increased activity over the planning period is flight training. So in 2020, there are a third flight training school actually began operation at the airport. So we got three full flight training schools now offering flight training activities for students and future pilots. A big part of this is the ongoing pilot shortages, which is really driving the continued need and growth for pilot training, not just at Flying Cloud, at all of our regional airports. And this is something we probably will see continuing into the future as those pilot shortages do not necessarily get better. COVID, you saw a lot of pilots aging out and retiring early from those main commercial fleets. And so those fleets now need new pilots to kind of fill those roles. And you'll continue to see that traffic drive for flight training here and at many other regional airports. Another big key here is airfield improvements. So as mentioned, those goals of increased airport safety and operational capabilities. So the increased development area and improved airfield efficiencies will be also driving future demand. So planned relocation of the air traffic control tower will open up new space on the south side of the airport. We'll see what that looks like for additional hangar and support development opportunities that previously were limited. So you potentially see a lot more jet hangars getting built on the south side of the runways. And we also see additional taxiways, which will improve airfield operational efficiency, allow aircraft to kind of maneuver around the airfield a lot easier than they used to. And also we're seeing pretty big additional safety improvements to the main runway, that 5,000-foot runway. Something called the Engineered Material Arresting System, or EMAS beds, will be installed on both ends of the runway 10R 28L to allow the full and safest use of the main runway in all weather conditions for the most demanding aircraft types using the facility today, and again making that facility safer and more encouraging for those jet traffic to continue to grow at the airport. So kind of go through some of these projects here as we're talking about what that we'll be seeing at the airport over the next 20 years. These are split in between near term, which is about 1 to 5 years timeline, to the midterm, about 5 to 10 years, that long term 10 plus years out. You see here we've got potentially some altered access to Pioneer Trail on the north side here. It's a county highway, which will require additional coordination with Hennepin County to get that new access to the north side there. That air traffic control tower to be relocated to again open up development space on the south side of the airfield. And those EMAS beds, as I mentioned, on either ends of that main runway, which will again improve safety to that main runway. And then also, again, new taxiways. You start seeing that in pink there on the north side to again improve kind of the operational efficiency of what's going on at the airfield to keep aircraft moving and flying in and out. That midterm, again, that 6 to 10 year time frame, we see additional taxiway development. Again, that those pink objects here are those taxiways. And we also see some new ground up, run up enclosures for reduced noise impacts from routine maintenance that will be taking place for, again, those additional jets, which will be based here in the future. You also see here in the north end some new hangar development on the north side as well that will potentially start to impact that park area that we've got here in the northeast. That will be something that will be also coordinated with Eden Prairie as those begin operation in the future. Finally, that long term, so that 10 plus years out, we see that full southern hangar area development. Again, that's a lot of your jet hangars that will be building out once that air traffic control tower moves. And we also see additional hangar development on the north side as well. The total cost of these improvements here, you can see the full improvement suite here is estimated to be about $134 million. Just a key note that these are in current dollars. So as these projects start to show up in later CIPs and things like that, they'll likely have higher dollar amounts because we're estimating these in current dollars, and obviously at cost escalation will continue in the future. And so you'll likely see those be higher. But at the time of this plan, this is estimated to be about $134 million through the planning horizon. I want to talk a bit about noise as well. As noise impacts are a big consideration of these plans and thinking about how these airports actually interact with the communities around them. So MAC, which follows FAA guidance, creates noise contour of impacts to surrounding communities from aircraft operations for our regional reliever airports. So these are updated every time a comprehensive plan is updated as well. They're measured through what's called the day-night average sound level, or DNL. So this is really the main metric to measure land use compatibility for land surrounding airports. The measure reflects a person's cumulative exposure to sound over a 24-hour period. So it's not exactly one event at a time. It's what do you expect to see for the 24-hour period as someone exposed to that noise? The council also has compatibility guidelines for what is considered prohibitive sound impacts for residential development. The links are here. This document was created about 2006, again, following those FAA guidance, and was something that we will be looking to update as FAA guidance is updated as well. So what does that look like on the ground here? So first, we're going to look at the comparison of existing operations. So that 2021, which is that blue with dotted solid lines here, to that red, which is the 2040 projected noise impacts. See a pretty modest growth. In fact, most of the biggest impacts here, which is 65 DNL, which is kind of what that threshold for what residential development is prohibited around airports. You see that threshold actually maintains still completely on airport property, and you see some minor impacts. That 60 DNL, which is more advisory, begin to start to impact some properties here, but it is pretty limited, and we'll see what that looks like with the land use superimposed with the sound contours here. You can see some of those homes here are starting to, by 2040, to see some of those noise impacts, but again, very limited, and the greatest impacts are still all completely maintained on the airport property. Another consideration also is environmental impact. So noise is a big environmental impact for humans, but also we will look to start looking at environmental impacts for other aspects of the environment. So the direct environmental impacts have been inventoried in the comprehensive plan. So similar to a city comprehensive plan, right? These projects are conceptual, and so it'd be difficult to actually analyze the impacts of environmental impacts from conceptual plans. And so these are inventory in this plan, but they are not studied in depth as you would expect in something in an environmental review. So generally with a lot of, or most of these airport long-term comprehensive plans, there's always going to be a follow-up environmental assessment for those specific projects identified on the actual plans. And so this process as well will also have an environmental review period that will follow up this approval of the long-term plan, likely in 26 or 27.
Hey, Joe, real quick here.
Yep.
I noticed that Adam Harrington asked a question. How do the noise impacts compare to MSP Airport?
Good question, Adam. So noise impacts from MSP are much less here at our regional airports. Generally, those large commercial jet traffic are going to produce a lot more noise impacts. So you see with the MSP plan, I don't have the image up, but those MSP noise impacts kind of go way beyond the airport, almost into, you know, many surrounding communities, including Eagan, Minneapolis, Richfield, Bloomington. Whereas with our regional airports, we see generally much less noise impacts. So you got a lot less operations, a lot smaller aircraft, generally mostly those smaller piston aircraft as well, which aren't as loud and large as those commercial jetliners that we see. So you see some impacts here for upfront regionals, but we don't see nearly even close to the impacts at the major commercial airport.
Okay, it looks like Adam has a follow-up question there.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. That's exactly what I was thinking about. Is I'm sure spending a lot of time in South Minneapolis, there's a lot more jet noise there than there probably would be here, even in the expanded area. Thanks.
Yes, yep. And I'll also note too, there's a little difference in how noise impacts are dealt with as well at our regional relievers and MSP. So MSP has the consent, the lawsuit that happened in the 90s, and MAC has worked very hard and spent a lot of money to mitigate noise impacts for existing properties in Minneapolis and Richfield and Bloomington, where those are. At our relievers, most of these mitigation activities are voluntary, and the MAC actually doesn't soundproof homes after they're built. However, if you are planning on building a house, right, and you see maybe those lines encroaching and land where you're planning on building, you should be looking at that builder's guide to understand what sort of levels of building materials you should be using to mitigate noise impacts that could be expected in the future. Cole, yeah.
Go ahead, Cole.
Yeah, that you might have answered my question, and if MAC staff want to add on anything, let me know. But I was just wondering, what, if any, mitigation does MAC offer other than like best practices for building design at any of the reliever airports, if there are any impacts?
Yeah, Eric, if you want to follow up on that, I'll let you expand a little bit.
Yeah, hi everyone. Eric Gillis, Director of Airport Planning. I actually think Michelle Ross, Director of Stakeholder Engagement, might be appropriate for this one.
Yeah, absolutely, Eric and the committee. So as Joe mentioned, at MSP we have the consent decree, so we mitigate down to the 60 DNL. For our reliever airports, we use FAA's established metric, so that's a 65 DNL. So we are not there are no homes, there are no residential homes that meet that 65 federal metric. So that is why we don't provide noise mitigation to areas around Flying Cloud Airport.
Yes, but
Thanks.
these.
If I can follow up, is there any airports other than MSP that have any impacted properties that are above the 65 level?
So that's a great question. So it's Crystal Airport. There are four homes that are located within the 65 DNL. We identified those through the long-term planning process for that airport and environmental work that was done after that. Those homes, the federal government also has a noise level reduction testing process. So the homes need to have there needs to be a 20 decibel level reduction between the exterior and the interior. And so if homes already have that, which in Minnesota, many homes do with our, in order to combat the weather, that also helps to combat noise. So none of the homes that were within the 65 DNL around Crystal Airport were eligible for mitigation based on federal standards.
Okay. Carter, see your hand up?
Yeah, I just had a question about those noise levels. Is that in relation? Is there a correlated like height of those general average airplanes that this noise level relates to? And if that is the case, does that change at all? Knowing that this is a highly used training airport in that height, as those planes kind of commonly loop around and keep kind of landing and taking off and landing again. Are those correlated at all with as far as the height of those planes that come on? And then when they're training, do they kind of stay at a lower height when they keep looping around and landing again?
Yes. So the model that we use to develop the noise contour is used, again, based on a federal model. We look at what's called an average annual day. So that takes into consideration use of all of the runways, how the runways are used on a regular basis, height of aircraft, altitude of aircraft is considered in that. So traffic that are air traffic that is using the traffic pattern to conduct training flights, they do stay at a sort of average altitude. There's no specific restriction as aircraft are landing or taking off in terms of altitude, but then within the traffic pattern as they're going back around to land or take off and practice that for student pilots, they do have a standard altitude that they need to reach within the pattern. So all of that is considered in the model. It is a model, so it is kind of average out that the use of the runways that are used more often over the course of a year are going to be more heavily identified in the model to be used in the future. For this exercise, we used what was historic in terms of runway use, types of aircraft. We then applied the forecast that was done for the airport, again, in terms of types of aircraft that would be using the airport, including flight training aircraft. And then the number of operations is another big factor in terms of the noise modeling, and then which runways are being used. So all of that was modified for the 2040 based on using historic data as a reference, but based on expectation for 2040 activity. And I'll note, I think Joe is probably going to get here, but we will be also doing environmental review on this process before any projects are implemented. And with that, there will be another noise review.
Yeah. What, if I may, one quick follow-up question. Does the model incorporate the water levels as far as sound and those, like specifically the Starring Lake that's just north of there?
So it does incorporate terrain.
Mm-hmm.
So in any way that the model can, I will say the FAA is continuing to update their model annually. So a lot of new features try and better mimic the modeling, the actual modeling to actual noise environment. We've also done some comparative analysis of model and monitor data, and we have found that the model tends to be conservative. So it kind of over identifies noise, which is, for planning purposes, is good to know if there's a what the potential issues could be. So we have found it to be overly conservative because it really is just looking at airplane noise, whereas in the actual environment, you'll have road noise, you'll have community noises, people mowing their lawns and other things. So it really just, because it focuses on the airplane specifically, it sort of is overly conservative.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep. Go ahead and proceed, Joe.
All right. I just like to note too, this little handy chart here too is nice. I would like to show this. Speaking of the kind of the relative impacts of noise of aircraft, you see like a Cessna, which is something you'd see a similar aircraft at Flying Cloud a lot, is around a vacuum cleaner, or a little quieter than a diesel truck, at a roadway driving by at 40 miles an hour. So, just put kind of the impacts of what those aircraft actually are sounding like in terms with other maybe common items here. And also note, these are cumulative, as Michelle noted, and there may be an event here or there where a pilot's flying low, or they're taking off low or something like that could have greater impacts. However, we do have voluntary guidance for pilots at our airports to ensure that they are flying in ways to reduce their impacts as well to the airport. So there's a lot of measures put in place here to kind of hopefully ensure that those noise impacts are mitigated as much as possible through operations. And then, if there's ever the possibility in the future of mitigation as well for noise in the houses too, that's an opportunity possibility as well if those 65 ever got out there. But currently, they are still on airport property, so not something we should be worrying about through the planning horizon here. So back to the slide here, as Michelle noted, so there will be a future environmental review period that will come up for the projects identified on this plan here. That will look at things like water quality, stormwater, solid waste, wastewater, air quality and emissions, and also additional review for noise as well. So that'll be something we'll probably see coming back in a year or two for additional review as well. I do want to note before we get to the regional policy slide, just the amount of public engagement that was put together for this plan. Again, robust as always with MAC planning efforts. So really this engagement ran from 2021 all the way to this year. So included multiple meetings at MAC's own Planning Development Environment Committee, 3 of those. Again, that stakeholder advisory panel that was set up, they met 5 times. There was additionally 4 public meetings called Discover Flying Cloud, which held throughout that period. They also went to the Flying Cloud Airport Advisory Committee twice for the process. Then again, that 45-day public comment period, which ran from February 19th to April 5th of this year. You see here about 22 total comments, with 15 of them around aircraft noise. I'm sure as we've seen today, aircraft noise is really something that people are most interested in because it's the most tangible effect of airports. So last slide here, before we go to the next steps, and then that final slide here is the relationship of regional policy. So as I mentioned earlier, long-term comprehensive plans are used as basic inputs to the council plans and policies, that 2050 transportation policy plan. And the relationship to the transportation policy plan, Flying Cloud is classified as a minor airport in the system. The improvements outlined in this plan will not change that airport designation in the regional system. There's no significant airside improvements, right? Those runways are staying the same as they are today. That would change the role of the airport. Certain projects may require some coordination with other jurisdictions, that county road project and potentially those park impacts. However, those are not regional in nature. The long-term comprehensive plan addresses all the required elements from the aviation system plan, and the relationship to the regional development guide, as I mentioned, which is Thrive 2040 still for this last one. So the policy direction in there is to create consistent, compatible, and coordinated local comprehensive plans, which MAC completing this plan really helps those local communities then plan for that future at the airport for when they do their comprehensive planning. And this plan, as all of our airports really do meet that prosperity outcome, looking at advancing the outcome is to plan and invest in infrastructure, amenities, and quality of life for regional economic competitiveness. Obviously, Flying Cloud being soon to be potentially one of those hubs of our regional jet and corporate jet traffic in the region really is something that will help give us some more economic competitiveness going forward, having that important airport there in the Southwest Metro. Looking forward, so as we see here, we've kind of gone through that stakeholder input and those public meetings and the FAA review for the plan. Now our next steps here is at the Met Council review level. So this will be going on through August. We'll be going to TAB, Transportation Committee, and then find the full council in August. Following that, MAC will then look at those conceptual improvements, determine the project funding from available sources. Then again, as I mentioned, they'll be moving in that environmental review process based on those project requirements, tentatively beginning in 2027. Following that, you'll start seeing these projects show up in the annual CIPs from the MAC, and then you'll see these projects get constructed in the future. So with that said, the recommend motion here, I have in the slide here, but if there's any additional questions, we are certainly open to more questions.
Thanks, Joe. I saw Patrick, you had your hand up. Did it get answered?
Yeah, it was actually back to the noise thing. I was just a point of curiosity if we have time.
Sure.
It just in the changing technology, I mean, it seems like the flight paths or the climb, I don't know what to call it, of the aircraft, and jets, obviously the technology is constantly changing for efficiency and things like that. Is a noise contour something we kind of revisit? How often? It seems like that's just going to change, and with increasing traffic, and I know it's cumulative, but just wondering your thoughts on that about technology and or yeah, thanks.
I can touch on that, and then maybe I'll shoot it over to Eric or Michelle. So we have seen kind of great improvements in sound impacts from jet engines over the decades, and that's you see mostly on those larger commercial jets that kind of turn over a lot quicker. The life of those jets are a lot shorter than maybe some of these smaller jet traffic you see at the regional airports. But those are also impacting our regional jets as well, and those are getting more efficient. Those are getting quieter, and so even as those operations are expected to increase in the future, we do expect them to the individual impact of each aircraft is expected to lessen over time, as it has in the past. And then for the actual contours, so at the reliever airports, these contours are updated again every time we do a long-term comprehensive plan. So we'll come back to Flying Cloud in same 10 years, and those contours will be updated again to understand the new impacts of those and understand maybe the changing role of the aircraft at the airport. And then MSP, those are done annually. So MSP, we're annually updating the contours and seeing where we're looking at every year. And then at the relievers is a little less often, but still often enough, I think, to understand the impacts as technology improves. But Eric, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah.
Joe,
okay. Thanks. I mean, that's
Michelle,
just thanks really quick. That's just such a when I'm out in the field.
Yeah, I would just
local
concur
planners,
with
it's just a
everything that
hot
Joe
issue.
said. Yeah, we will be doing the additional contour for the environmental assessment. The other piece that Joe mentioned is the kind of the pilot shortage. So there is sort of a cyclical cycle to pilot training, and so we do kind of see that fluctuate up and down. So, but that's related to the operations that you already noted. So, yeah.
And Michelle, would you say? I mean, I know the piston aircraft are, generally an older fleet, but do you think a lot of the noise impacts are coming from the piston aircraft or more from the jet aircraft, especially at lower flying cloud, where you got a lot more mixes of those operations happening?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the piston aircraft with the pilot training, they represent a lot more of the operation. So I think just because of the sheer volume, they're able to contribute a lot more to the noise. But that being said, the jets do kind of have a bigger noise footprint. And so you'll actually see that the noise contour on that south parallel runway is actually bigger than on the north parallel, whereas most of the flight training does occur on the north parallel. So and the jet traffic comes in on the south parallel. So I think between the footprint of the jets kind of can kind of balance out the fewer number of operations.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. Good. Okay, Kyle, I see your hand up.
One question, going back to the graph on the number of flight operations, it looked like 25 years ago there was significantly more operations at Flying Cloud. What is the reason for the significant drop there from 180,000 to 80,000 and then not going back up?
Thanks, Kyle. Generally, this is more of a trend we've seen not just at Flying Cloud, but all of these more general aviation airports. Is there was really a pretty steep drop that all these airports really peaked in activity in the late 90s, early 2000s, and right around kind of 9/11, when that aviation situation maybe changed a little bit, we started seeing pretty precipitous drops throughout the 2000s until about the mid 2010s. We started to see a growth, and then you see kind of a large bump here. Actually, ironically, around COVID, is because, again, that pilot shortages started hitting, and then the training really started kicking off. And so you see kind of a big jump back up to maybe where we were about 10, 15 years ago. But that's more in general. And Eric, if you want to add a little more specifics on there, feel free to jump in.
Go ahead,
Yeah,
Eric.
Mr. Chair, members, thank you for that question. So everything that Joe said about this is correct, but something else too that is kind of going on in the industry is technology is improving in how we track aircraft. So there are systems that help the positioning or reliability of the positioning of aircraft. And so air traffic controllers back in the day, not that they're getting away with it, but the spacing of aircraft perhaps could have been tighter in terms of aircraft operations. And so now that there's additional capabilities in tracking aircraft positioning, there's additional regulation that goes into the spacing of aircraft requirements. You also have things like the change in aircraft type at this airport specifically. So with faster aircraft require larger spacing requirements. And so evolving into more of a jet turbine type airport also impacts the spacing and capacity of the airport as well. So it's a number of things, but everything that Joe said too, from an economic standpoint and around the 2008, 2010 standpoint, economic downturn, that also contributes to it. And then the spiking in 2018 to 2020 was largely COVID related as well. So a lot of the surrounding schools and academia schools, when those pilots or training student pilots had to continue their training elsewhere. And so that's also kind of a reason why there's a resurgence of the activity. But since then, things have kind of normalized, and that's why the forecast is showing a modest growth. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. Just curious about the drop to less than half of what the previous operations had been 25 years ago, and then that it won't even go back to where it was. Thank you.
You bet.
Yeah, and then I just expand on that. Is you'd also, if you look at I can send a link out to the updated aviation system plan. You see that at all the regional airports. You see kind of a similar drop in all of them, and then you start to see some rebounding in the last couple of years. And so, from an airport standpoint, that's kind of a good thing, right? That means we built our airports for a lot more operations, and now we kind of are already there. And so there's less big projects we need to do to meet future demand, because we've already kind of met that past demand that we aren't going to necessarily see in the future too. So it's a positive, I think, from airport development standpoint, just because we already have the facilities here with the runways, and we don't need to have big runway expansion projects anymore in the region. And so, yeah, I'll stop.
All right, thanks for the presentation. Chair Mitteco, I'll turn it back to you.
All right, thank you. So like I said, this was an action item, and it is an action item for TAC. And TAC planning did adopt this, I believe, unanimously, and recommend the staff recommendation, which has a lot of verbiage. I can read it if you want. I can find it. Otherwise, I think this is a roll call vote for TAC.
All right, first we'll have to ask for a motion and a second here. Quiet group here.
I make a motion to approve.
All right, thanks,
Second.
Kyle.
Sabota.
All right,
Second.
thank you, guys. Any further discussion?
Who was the second?
Patrick. All right, Joe, we'll turn it back to you for a roll call.
Pearson,
Aye.
Robjet,
Aye.
Labrie,
Aye.
Piper,
Aye.
Isaacson left, Jensen,
Aye.
Allen,
Aye.
Mathis,
Aye.
Schulze,
Aye.
Lucher,
Aye.
Howley,
Aye.
Hartzell,
Aye.
Omi,
Aye.
Hager,
Aye.
Mail,
Aye.
Peterson,
Aye.
Collins,
Aye.
Fighton,
Aye.
Harrington,
Aye.
Sabota,
Aye.
Turner Bergen,
Aye.
Reef,
Aye.
Boylan,
Aye.
Hinneker,
Aye.
and Kotsukos.
Aye.
24-0 as usual with Reef here and Isaacson no longer here.
All right, wonderful. Chair Mitteco, you have any additional comments from the planning committee?
So I did want to note that we had at the June meeting, we did have one other information item. I do want to highlight it because I don't think it will come back to TAC until adoption, but we discussed the 2026 Unified Planning Work Program, which outlines a lot of the planning tasks that Met Council and partners will do over the next year. This had come to TAC planning in May with a list of ideas. Those were refined and represented to TAC planning in June. So that includes, that's a step in the process and outlines, like I said, the work program for Met Council and is needed in order for them to be reauthorized with, authorized with federal funding for some of those studies. That was discussed. Like I said, it was just an information item. We didn't have a lot of discussion related to it, but it will be coming back to the July meeting. So we will have 2 items at TAC planning in July. One of them is adoption of the UPWP, the 26 UPWP, and release for public comment. And TAC planning is the only committee that has action on that. So I just wanted to highlight that here. Jed and Joe, you can correct me on that, but that's what my notes say, so I'm going to stick with it. And so the schedule for that is that if TAC planning takes action on July 11th to release that for public comment, the comment period will be for 21 days and close on August 1st. And then I believe it will come back through the full committee process for adoption after the public comment period. And I pause there in case staff needs to correct me on any of that.
Chair, one detail to add.
Yes.
Sure.
The TAC will see this item for its consideration before the public comment period is closed. So the TAC will take action on recommending the 2026 UPWP without a public comment report available. It will be available before TAB takes action. Historically, we receive a very low volume of comments on this document.
Thanks, Jed. And then, sorry about that. I a kid home and he's outside my door, but if you can hear any of that. The last item I will bring up is that we will be, like I said, TAC planning will meet again in July. And the other item we'll have is another aviation item, which will be the TPP aviation system plan update, releasing that for public comment. We heard the information item on that in a previous month, but we will hear that again with an action in July. And that is all I have for TAC planning.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Any questions? All right, if not, we'll move on. I know funding and programming didn't meet before this meeting, but Chair Kaslucher, I'll turn it over to you if you have anything to add.
Thank you, Chair. I have nothing to add, so other than have a terrific weekend.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Same to you. All right, next we'll move on to informational items. Do we have any informational items? All right, other business? Going twice. Nothing there. With that, unless there's anything else, we'll consider the meeting adjourned. Thanks, everyone. I wish you all a happy 4th of July and hope you have a safe holiday weekend.